Something quiet has been happening beneath the surface of modern relationships, and most men won't notice it until it's already reshaped their lives. You can see it in the way a man carries himself after 6 months with a woman he believes he loves. The shoulders drop slightly, the eye contact softens in a way that isn't warmth, but something closer to petition. He laughs differently at her jokes than he does with his friends. He checks his phone more, he explains himself more, and somewhere in the architecture of his daily decisions, a small but critical structural beam has been removed. It starts innocuously. He meets a woman who makes him feel something he hasn't felt in years, or perhaps has never felt at all. The attention is intoxicating. The validation is immediate. For the first time in a long time, he feels chosen. And in that feeling of being chosen, he begins to make a series of micro-negotiations with himself that he doesn't even register as negotiations. He cancels gym sessions to be available when she's free. He stops going to that Sunday morning thing he used to do with his friend. He starts curating his opinions slightly, softening the edges of his perspective to avoid friction. He tells himself this is maturity, this is a compromise, this is what love looks like, but something else is happening underneath. Darwin understood this with a precision that makes most modern relationship advice look like children's drawings. He saw that in the theater of sexual selection, every signal matters. Every behavior is read, consciously or not, as an indicator of genetic quality, survivability, and strength. And the signals men think they're sending when they become emotionally available, accommodating, and centered around a woman are not the signals that actually land. A man believes he's demonstrating love. What he is often demonstrating, in the cold biological calculus that still governs attraction beneath all our civilized language, is weakness. I work with men who come to me confused. They did everything right. They were attentive. They were vulnerable. They made her the center of their world. And now she's distant. Or she's gone. Or she's still there but looks at him differently, with a kind of subtle disappointment she can't quite articulate and he can't quite name. And when I ask these men what they've been building outside of the relationship, what mission or purpose has been guiding their days, they often go quiet. Because the relationship became the mission, she became the purpose. And in doing so, they handed her a responsibility she never asked for and cannot fulfill, to be the source of their meaning. By the end of this, you'll understand precisely why emotional detachment isn't cruelty or coldness, but a kind of biological intelligence that Darwin identified long before modern psychology dressed it up in softer language. And you'll see what quietly dies in a man when he mistakes emotional investment for strength. Charles Darwin spent years observing the natural world with a patience that borders on the obsessive. He watched finches, he catalogued barnacles, he studied orchids, earthworms, and the expression of emotion in humans and animals. And beneath all of it, he was watching one thing: the mechanics of selection. Not the romantic version we tell ourselves, where the best hearts win, but the actual process by which nature decides what survives and what doesn't. And one of his most unsettling observations was this: in sexual selection, the qualities that help you survive are not always the same qualities that allow you to reproduce. Sometimes they're opposite. A peacock's tail is a biological liability. It's heavy. It's conspicuous to predators. It escapes harder. By every measure of survival efficiency, it should have been selected out of existence. But it wasn't, because peahens choose mates with the most extravagant tails. The tail doesn't signal survival fitness. It signals something else: the ability to survive despite the handicap. It says, I am so strong that I can afford this weakness, and that's what makes it attractive. Now translate that to human relationships, specifically to the modern man who believes that emotional openness and constant availability are what women want. He's been told this. The culture has spent 2 decades insisting that vulnerability is strength, that emotional labor is attractive, that being in touch with your feelings makes you a better partner. And on some level, in some contexts, there's truth in that. But there's a difference between a man who can access his emotions from a place of sovereignty and a man whose emotions have become his master. And women, whether they can articulate it or not, feel that difference immediately. Here's the thesis that runs through everything Darwin observed, and it's the spine of what we're examining today. A man who makes a woman the center of his emotional world signals to her, at a level below language, that he has no center of his own. And a woman cannot build attraction around a man who has outsourced his gravitational call to her. This isn't conscious. She doesn't wake up and think, his emotional dependence on me indicates low mate value. But her body knows. Her instincts know because for hundreds of thousands of years, female reproductive success depended on choosing men who could maintain their strength, their direction, their psychological stability, even when she wasn't there. Even when she was upset, even when she withdraws, a man who falls apart when she pulls back will fall apart when the environment turns hostile, when resources become scarce, when a real threat arrives. And that's not cruelty on her part, that's survival. I see this play out in a specific pattern. A man meets a woman. Early on, he's busy, he has his life, he's building something, he's training for something. He has friends he sees, projects he's working on, a rhythm to his days that doesn't require her permission or presence. And she's intrigued, she pursues, she invests. Then they get together, and slowly, incrementally, he begins to rearrange his life around her. He thinks he's showing her she matters, and she does matter. But what he's actually showing her is that nothing else matters as much. And the moment she becomes the most essential thing in his life, she loses respect for the life he's living. Darwin wrote about sexual selection as a kind of economic system, a marketplace where signals are currency and perception is reality. In The Descent of Man, he observed that the males who succeeded in reproduction weren't always the strongest or the smartest in absolute terms. They were the ones who could display strength, signal fitness, and demonstrate that they possessed resources, whether physical, genetic, or psychological, that exceeded baseline survival needs. The display mattered as much as the substance, and the display required, above all, one thing: autonomy. The appearance that the male's survival and success were not contingent on the female's approval. This is where modern men get lost. They think emotional availability means making her the judge of their worth. They think intimacy means letting her mood dictate theirs. They think commitment means sacrificing the very autonomy that made them attractive in the first place. And so they do what feels like love, but, in the old language of evolutionary psychology, reads like surrender. Let's go inside the mind of the man as this happens, because the collapse is never sudden. It's a slow conversion, like a currency losing value, so gradually you don't notice until you try to spend it and realize it buys nothing. At first, he thinks he's doing well. He's in a relationship. She's beautiful, or smart, or both. His friends are envious. His family approves. He feels like he's won something, and in those early months, everything she does seems like evidence that he made the right choice. She laughs at his jokes. She texts him first. She initiates sex. He interprets this as confirmation that his strategy, being open, being available, being devoted, is working. But underneath, something else is starting. She begins testing him in small ways, often without even realizing she's doing so. She cancels plans at the last minute to see if he'll get upset or if he'll accommodate. She disagrees with him in front of his friends to see if he'll hold his ground or defer to her. She pulls back slightly in affection to know if he'll chase or if he'll remain unmoved. These aren't malicious games, they're unconscious audits. She's checking whether the man she chose is actually the man she thought he was, or whether he's putting on a show he doesn't really possess. And the man, if he hasn't done the deeper work, if he hasn't built a life that exists independent of her validation, starts failing these tests without knowing they're tests. He accommodates the cancelled plans, he softens his opinions, he notices her pulling back and immediately moves closer, trying to close the distance with more attention, more words, more reassurance. He thinks he's being loving. What he's actually doing is confirming her unconscious suspicion that his frame is weaker than hers, that he needs her more than she needs him. And in the calculus of attraction, need is the opposite of desire. I once spoke to a man who had been with his girlfriend for 2 years. He was a good man, successful in his career, intelligent, well-liked. But he came to me because she'd started talking about needing space, and he couldn't understand why. As Wes spoke, the pattern became clear. He had, over the course of the relationship, stopped doing the things that made him enjoyable. He'd stopped training. He'd stopped traveling. He'd stopped having those long, aimless conversations with his friends that went nowhere but mattered. He'd stopped reading the books that challenged him. He told himself he was prioritizing the relationship, but what he'd actually done was shrink his world to fit inside hers. And now, standing in that smaller world, he was asking her to fill it, and she couldn't. Not because she didn't care about him, but because she couldn't respect a man who had made her the source of his aliveness. The progression always follows the same shape. Phase 1 is numbness disguised as contentment. He tells himself he's happy, he's comfortable. This is what stability feels like. But if you watch him closely, there's a subtle flattening. The sharp edges of his personality begin to soften. He laughs a little less loudly. He takes fewer risks. He stops saying the thing that might create tension, and he doesn't notice this happening because it happens one micro-compromise at a time. Phase 2 is justification. She starts behaving differently. She's less affectionate. She's more critical. She picks small fights. And instead of recognizing these as signals, he explains them away. She's stressed at work. She's tired. It's her time of the month. He creates narratives that protect him from the truth, which is that she's beginning to lose attraction because he's becoming predictable, manageable, safe in a way that kills desire. Phase 3 is self-abandonment. Now he's actively trying to fix the problem, but his solution is always the same. More of what isn't working, more availability, more emotional disclosure, more attempts to talk about the relationship. He thinks that if he can communicate clearly enough, she'll understand how much he loves her, and everything will return to the way it was. But every conversation like this pushes her further away, because what she's experiencing isn't a lack of understanding. It's a lack of attraction to the man he's become. Watch how his daily behavior changes. He starts texting her more frequently, not because he has something to say, but to maintain a connection. He starts checking her social media to see what she's doing and who she's with. He starts changing his schedule around hers, making himself available whenever she is, treating his own time as less valuable than hers. He apologizes for things he doesn't believe he did wrong to end the conflict. He stops asserting preferences. When she asks where he wants to eat, he says, "Wherever you want." He thinks he's being easygoing, but what he's actually communicating is that he has no center, no direction, no internal compass that operates independently of her. His friends notice it first. They invite him out, and he says, "I have to check with her first." Not because she's controlling, but because he's voluntarily handed her veto power over his time. He skips the gym because she wants to watch a show together. He stops working on the side project that used to excite him because it takes time away from her. And every time he makes these choices, he tells himself it's love. But it's not love. It's fear. Fear that if he's not constantly available, constantly attentive, continually proving his devotion, she'll leave. And that fear, that need for her validation, is precisely what makes her want to go. The man she later pursues, or the man she leaves him for, often looks similar on the surface, similar age, similar career, similar interests. But the difference is in how he moves through the world. He has something he's building that doesn't require her. He sees her, he enjoys her, he might even love her, but his life doesn't collapse when she's not there. He doesn't text her constantly. He doesn't rearrange his schedule around hers. He doesn't seek her approval before making decisions. And this isn't coldness, it's centeredness, and she feels it as strength, as the kind of stability she can relax into, instead of the type of neediness she has to manage. Darwin would say this is simple biology expressing itself through modern behavior. The male who survives and thrives is the male who can maintain his trajectory regardless of female approval. Because in the ancestral environment, a male whose psychological state was contingent on female presence was a male who couldn't hunt when she was pregnant, couldn't defend when she was nursing, couldn't lead when the tribe needed direction. His emotional dependency was a liability, and female attraction evolved to avoid that liability. Now zoom out from the individual man to the system he's operating in, because his confusion isn't random, it's engineered. We live in a culture that has spent the last 30 years telling men that traditional masculinity is toxic, that emotional availability is the highest virtue, that the path to female desire runs through vulnerability and emotional labor. And then it acts surprised when men who follow that advice end up confused about why they're not desired. The dating market has become the theater where the stated rules and the actual rules are in direct contradiction. Women say they want a sensitive man who communicates and is in touch with his feelings, and they do like that, but they want it from a man who is first and foremost centered in his own mission, his own purpose, his own direction. They want vulnerability from a position of strength, not as a substitute for strength. But men hear the first part and miss the second, so they lead with sensitivity and wonder why it doesn't create attraction. Dating apps have accelerated this confusion into a systematic crisis. A woman on a dating app has access to hundreds of men. The top 20% of men receive interest from 80% of women. If you're not in that top 20%, you're functionally invisible. And what determines the top 20% is not kindness. It's not emotional intelligence. It's status signals. Height, money, physical appearance, and social proof. The things Darwin would have recognized immediately as fitness indicators. So the average man is operating in an environment where his emotional availability, his kindness, and his willingness to commit are economically worthless in the sexual marketplace. They don't generate attraction. They don't create leverage. At best, they're qualities a woman might appreciate after she's already attracted for other reasons. But leading with them is like showing up to a job interview and listing your hobbies. It's not that they're bad, it's that they're not what the selection process is filtering for. Add to this the cultural layer, the genuine risk a man faces when he approaches women in public, the possibility of public shaming, the HR complaint if he asks out a coworker, the social media pile-on if he misreads a signal. The dating environment has become, for many men, a game where the rules are unclear, the risks are high, and the reward is increasingly uncertain, and so they withdraw. Not because they don't want connection, but because the cost-benefit analysis, run through tens of thousands of years of male risk assessment psychology, returns a simple answer: not worth it. Darwin would recognize this as an environmental pressure. When the cost of pursuing mates exceeds the probability of success, males redirect energy elsewhere. We see it in nature all the time. Males that can't compete in the mating market invest in survival, in alliances, and in building resources outside the sexual economy. Human men are doing the same thing. They're redirecting to career, to fitness, to hobbies, to friendships, to video games, to anything that doesn't require them to navigate a system that feels rigged against their honest participation. But here's the tragedy. The men who withdraw completely are making the same mistake as the men who overinvest. They're still allowing the female sexual marketplace to define their behavior. They're still reacting rather than acting from the center. Whether you're chasing female validation or running from it, you're still organizing your life around it. You're still giving it the power to determine your direction. And the cost of this, whether you overinvest or withdraw, is the same: a slow erosion of self-respect. Because somewhere deep in the male psyche, there's a knowing that you're not living in alignment with your own values. You're not building what you're capable of building. You're not becoming what you're capable of becoming. You're letting fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of being alone run your decisions. And the man who lives in fear long enough stops recognizing himself. If a system demands your constant emotional vulnerability but offers no protection, walking away isn't weakness, it's pattern recognition. But walking away into bitterness, into resentment, into a story where women are the enemy, is just another trap. The real question is, can you build a life so centered in purpose, in mission, in something larger than your own comfort, that female approval becomes irrelevant to your sense of worth? Not because you don't value women, but because you've remembered that you are not here to be chosen. You're here to build. She doesn't destroy your purpose. She reveals whether you had one to begin with. And if her absence or her disapproval is enough to derail you, the problem isn't her. It's the absence of the internal structure that should have been there long before she arrived. Let's bring this into behavior, into the daily choices that separate a man who understands this from a man who doesn't, because philosophy without application is just decoration. And the application of Darwinian logic to modern male psychology looks like this. First, notice when you're emotionally kneeling. Emotional kneeling is any behavior where you're seeking her approval, her validation, her permission to feel okay about yourself. It shows up in over-texting, in explaining yourself when no explanation is required, in apologizing to end tension rather than because you've actually done something wrong, in changing your plans based on her mood. Every time you do this, you're teaching her that you are manageable. And manageability is the death of attraction. What does the man who understands Darwin do instead? He sits with her disapproval. He allows her to be upset without rushing to fix it. He understands that her emotions are hers to manage, not his to control. He remains centered in his own direction, even when she's pulling in another direction. This doesn't mean being cold. It means being unmoved. There's a difference. Cold is withdrawn, defensive, punishing. Unmoved is simply non-reactive. It says, I hear you, I see you, and I'm not collapsing my frame to manage your emotions. Second, notice when you've abandoned your mission. If you don't have something you're building that exists independent of her, you don't have a mission. You have a girlfriend-shaped hole in your life that you're trying to fill with a girlfriend, and that hole will never be filled. Because what you're actually looking for is purpose, and purpose doesn't come from another person. It comes from the slow, disciplined application of your will towards something that matters to you. What does the sovereign man do? He protects his time like it's the only non-renewable resource he has, because it is. He doesn't cancel training, he doesn't skip the project, he doesn't abandon the thing that makes him come alive just because she's available. And when she says, "You care more about that than me," he doesn't defend, he doesn't argue. He looks at her calmly and says, "I care about you, and I care about becoming the man I'm capable of becoming. I'm not choosing between them, I'm integrating both." And then he continues with his mission, and she either respects that or she doesn't. But either way, he doesn't negotiate it. Third, notice when you're overexposing your internal state. Vulnerability is not the same as constant emotional disclosure. Vulnerability is allowing someone to see you in moments of genuine struggle or joy. Emotional disclosure is giving her a real-time update on every fluctuation of your internal weather. And most men, in the name of being open, have become emotional broadcasters. They tell her every doubt, every fear, every insecurity as it arises, and they think this is intimacy, but it's not. It's burden shifting. You're making her carry the weight of your unprocessed emotion, and she will for a while because she cares, but over time she'll start to resent it, because what she wanted was a partner, not a patient. What does the man who understands this do instead? He processes alone first. He sits with the fear, the doubt, the insecurity in silence, in journaling, in training, in conversation with a mentor or a close friend. He doesn't suppress it, he integrates it. And then, if it's something that genuinely affects the relationship, he shares it. But he shares it as a man who has already done the work of understanding it, not as a man who is asking her to do that work for him. Fourth, refuse to prioritize comfort over growth. Most relationships decay not because of conflict, but because of comfort. You stop challenging each other, you stop taking risks, you build a life that is safe, predictable, and small, and you tell yourselves this is maturity. But it's not, it's atrophy. And atrophy is the slow death that looks like life because the body is still breathing. What does the man of strength do? He regularly introduces productive discomfort into his own life. He takes the trip even if she doesn't want to come. He starts the business even if it means less time together in the short term. He has a complicated conversation even if it creates tension. He trains even when he doesn't feel like it. He reads the difficult book. He takes on the project that scares him, not because he's running from the relationship, but because he refuses to let the relationship become the ceiling of his growth. Fifth, allow loss. This is the hardest one. Most men will do anything to avoid losing the woman they love. They'll compromise themselves. They'll abandon their values. They'll shrink their world. They'll live in quiet resentment for years, all to avoid the possibility that she might leave. And in doing so, they guarantee that she will go or that she'll stay, but stop desiring them, which is worse. What does the man who has integrated Darwinian logic do? He accepts that she might leave. He doesn't want her to. He'll do the reasonable work to build a healthy relationship, but he will not sacrifice his sovereignty to keep her, because she understands that a woman who stays with a man who has sacrificed his sovereignty doesn't actually want to be there. She's staying out of pity or guilt or inertia, and that's not love, that's entrapment. And he refuses to live in a relationship where he's tolerated rather than desired. Two paths are available to you from here, and the choice you make in the next 6 months will determine which one you walk. Path 1. You ignore this. You tell yourself it doesn't apply to you, or that your situation is different, or that the woman you're with is different, or that love shouldn't be this calculated. And maybe you're right. Perhaps you're the exception. But if you're honest with yourself, if you look at the patterns in your relationship, at the way she looks at you now versus how she looked at you in the beginning, at the way you feel about yourself when you're with her versus how you used to feel, you'll see the signs. And if you ignore them, here's what happens. In 5 years, you'll be smaller. Your world has contracted further. You've given up more of the things that made you interesting because each year there was another negotiation, another compromise, another thing you let go of to keep the peace. You're still together maybe, but she doesn't look at you the way you want to be looked at. She's distant or critical, or she's having an affair, or she's just gone in all the ways that matter, even though her body is still there. And you're confused, and hurt and angry because you did everything you were supposed to do. You were sensitive, you were available, you made her the center of your life, and it didn't work. And now you're 40 or 45 or 50, and you've forgotten what it feels like to be the kind of man who moves through the world with direction. You've become a reactor, a negotiator, a man who lives in the gaps between other people's needs, and the weight of that will make you bitter in ways you won't even recognize. Path 2. You take this as initiation. You recognize that what you've just read isn't an attack, it's an invitation to stop abandoning yourself in the name of love, to stop negotiating with fear, to stop pretending that making yourself smaller will somehow make you more lovable. And you begin the work. Not the loud work, not the performative work, the quiet work. You go back to the gym, not to look good for her, but because discipline is how you remember you're capable of keeping promises to yourself. You go back to the project, the hobby, the thing you abandoned. You start saying no when you mean no. You stop over-explaining. You stop apologizing for having boundaries. You sit with her discomfort without trying to fix it. You let her see that your life continues with or without her approval. And you do this not to manipulate her, not to make her chase you, but because it's the only way to live with self-respect. And here's what happens. Some women will leave because what they wanted wasn't a partner. It was a project. It was someone they could manage, control, and fix. And when you stop being that, they'll lose interest. And that's okay, because the women who stay, or the women you attract from this new place, will be different. There'll be women who don't want to manage you. There'll be women who are attracted to your centeredness, your mission, your refusal to collapse under the weight of their emotions. There'll be women who can relax into your strength instead of constantly testing to see if it's real. And in 5 years, you're different. You're lonelier in some ways. You have fewer people around you because you stopped tolerating relationships built on convenience or habit. But the people who remain are real. Your days have more silence in them, but the silence doesn't feel empty. It feels full. You've built something. Maybe it's a business. Perhaps it's a body of work. Perhaps it's just a life that you actually want to live. And when you meet a woman now, you meet her from a different place. Not from need, not from scarcity, but from surplus. And she feels that, and everything that follows is built on a foundation that won't collapse the first time she pulls away. A man who makes a woman the center of his emotional world signals to her, at a level below conscious thought, that he has no center of his own. This is the pattern Darwin saw in every species he studied. The males who succeeded weren't the ones who needed the female most. They were the ones who demonstrated, through behavior, through consistency, through the unshakable stability of their own direction, that they would survive regardless. And that's what made them worth choosing. She doesn't kill your purpose, she reveals whether you had one. And if your life begins and ends with her approval, you've already lost the only thing that could have made you attractive, the ability to exist, fully and completely, without her. If this hit something in you, if it named a pattern you've been living but couldn't see, share it with the men who need it. Subscribe to keep this work alive, because the men who understand this are becoming rarer, and the world needs them more than it knows. You're not here to be chosen. You're here to be chosen worth choosing you for, and that work begins the moment you stop kneeling.